welcome to meet us on the Abraham Path. It's good to see everybody again. I'm Anisa Mehdi, Executive Director of the Abraham Path Initiative. I'm here in New Jersey, USA, and you are here from Turkey, Sweden, Switzerland, Iraq, other parts of the USA, and we invite you to please take a moment and introduce yourself in our chat. The Abraham Path is a route toward cross-cultural communication, heritage preservation, and economic growth through on-the-ground walking tourism and trail development, and cultural heritage research and storytelling, both on location and online. Since 2007, API has worked with local partners to build about 1,200 miles of trails in Jordan, Palestine, Turkey, and Sinai. We're investing now in a new trail in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. These trails are designed so we can get to know one another and experience the rich hospitality of this region that we call the Middle East. Hospitality practiced often in honor of the legendary prophet Abraham. API is working on cultural heritage projects now in northern Iraq that are funded by the Alif Foundation. We're glad to welcome Maya Kominko and other members of the Alif leadership who join us today from Geneva. For more on Alif, please visit the link in the chat. Today, we'll meet Sister Makrina Finlay, a Benedictine nun serving at the Dinklaga Abbey in northern Germany. She's in charge of church asylum and has met many Yazidis from Iraq over the past 5 or so years. Dr. Finlay, originally from California, got her PhD in modern history from Oxford University. She has consulted to the United Nations and is co-author of several papers on Yazidis that may interest you. We are putting links to those papers in the chat. Sister Makrina and I have been Zooming together for weeks, for months actually, as she has prepared for multiple journeys to Iraq to research the Yazidi tradition of khair. Hers is an original undertaking. No one else has looked at this subject. And one of the complexities, of course, in appreciating Yazidi tradition is that it's an oral tradition. This is what she shared with me in September about the challenge there.
No written history, even the relatively modern history. I mean, just what this identity is, both in terms of theology, but also in terms of just who they are as a people, and how to interpret certain events. All that's up for grabs.
And now I'm delighted to welcome Sister Makrina Finlay to our webinar, joining us today from Tel Azir in the south side of Mount Shingal. I'm getting to know the geography of northern Iraq pretty well. So glad to have you with us. You've been having quite an exciting time. What's your day been like?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. And it's been quite an adventurous 3 weeks so far. I'm near the end of this trip. And today is the first of 2 days of Jamaya at the Shrine of Sheikh Mand. Alif actually was the funder for rebuilding that shrine. And this is the first time because of COVID last year, this is the first time in 9 years that they have been able to have their traditional feast. And the family that I'm staying with originally built the shrine, and they and the other members of their family are largely responsible for putting this on. So it's been wonderful to have an inside look in all of that, to be part of the preparations. Tomorrow there will be substantially more of that. Today's the lighter, easy day, and tomorrow will be the real sort of the bigger celebration. But light met something like 1,000 people there today, which is a pretty big party to begin with. So that's
people
been today so far.
Dancing, eating, singing. What an opportunity after 9 years of not being able to do this together. The communal
Yeah.
experience
Well,
is so important.
Two of the people who I was with, they're both about 18 years old. And I looked at them and they didn't know what they were doing either, because they were 9 years old. And so that for me really brought home the importance of what's happening right now. So
let's take a look and see where we actually are on the planet. I love the Google map because it gives us perspective. Here's Ukraine, this is Crimea, Straits of Hormuz, the Red Sea, the Mediterranean, Black Sea, Caspian Sea. And as we move in, we see these artificial lines, the white lines that we humans have imposed on the geography to call and claim territory and countries. And here we move in to this interesting geologic feature, which is Mount Shingal or Sinjar. So Shingal is the Kurmanji word and Sinjar is Arabic. So what are we seeing here and where are you?
what we're seeing is the Shingal mountain range, which is about 100 kilometers broad. So it's very thin and narrow, but it's very, very long. So it's about 100 kilometers long on each side. And I am, you see Wardia there on the street, just sort of quite, you found it. And if you go down a bit further from there, you'll see that there's Tel Azir. So that's where I'm located right now. Where I was earlier today was up in the mountain just beyond Wardia. So that's the space that I've been. We don't have that village in there, but.
How do you get up there? I mean, look at the sides of that mountain. They are so forbidding. Are there roads you climb? Is it pulling on ropes? How do you get up there?
There are some roads, but they are not, the ones in Jadali end pretty quickly. So you are four-wheeling in whatever vehicle that you're in to get all the way to Sheikh Mand. So that's a trail that still needs to be blazed after ISIS.
And speaking of, this is where that horrible 2014 massacre took place on this mountain.
It's where people took refuge from that massacre. So in the villages below is where all of the bloodshed took place. That village right in the middle that you see, Kursi, I was there yesterday and the day before. It is not destroyed. It's one of a very couple of villages that remain untouched, but all of the villages below that you have names on and above that are not in our picture, that's where a whole lot of bloodshed took place.
And the mountains were what protected the people who
that was their protection. It's it's where they've found protection for centuries. There's a lot of history. There's also a lot of politics in it. The reason for them having to move down to the villages was in large part because that's where they found protection. And there was a political decision to move them into collective villages. Again, that also was a complete displacement of the entire community that happened in the 70s and 80s. So Mount Shingal, Shingal Mountain is their home. It's the space of their ancestral villages, and for good reasons, because even in the face of ISIS, it offered protection. Thousands, tens of thousands more would have died had they not had that space.
Thank you. I'm sure our audience members, I'm hoping, will have lots of questions for Sister Makrina. Please use the Q&A in your control panel and I'll bring your questions to her attention. Now, you said in that little clip that I shared, it's all up for grabs, the identity, the interpretation of history and what's happened. Now, that's an enormous assignment, but you've chosen a very specific slice of this assignment, the study of a religious tradition called Khair. And I was just going to ask you if you'd take us into that world with you, the world you're discovering, giving us an opportunity to learn. And I'm really pleased and proud that we get to share the first results of your work here with our Abraham Path community.
Yeah, I'm delighted to do that, and I'll open up a presentation that I've prepared. We've been sort of jokingly calling this project #blessed for a while. It probably won't be the final name of it, but been sort of a fun way of getting into what's really a very serious topic and a very important element that shapes who and what Yazidis are. I'm going to divide this presentation into two main parts, sort of three. The first, where I just share a little bit about Yazidis. I'm not entirely sure of the knowledge base of the audience, but I'm going to go quickly through the who Yazidis are, where they are, and then look at where. So we'll get right into that. This is a picture I took at Lawlish a few days ago. Yeah, who are the Yazidis? We just said they're an ancient religious and ethnic group. Now they're primarily in northern Iraq. That was not always the case. Their population has diminished substantially over hundreds and hundreds of years. That has a lot to do with the politics and the challenges of the region, as well as their specific system of beliefs, which we'll get into. They number something like 500,000 to 1 million, but it's unclear exactly where in that range they fit. You'll see estimates within that range. Yazidis are monotheists. So we think about Abraham as being the first. It seems that that might not be the case in the very spaces where he was living, and so Iraq, this is Nineveh, not exactly his space, but very close by. It seems to have been something that was not exclusive to him, and that existed in other forms where you have the belief in one good God. A major difference, or thing that distinguishes Yazidis, is in honor of Tausi Melek, the angel that for them showed what it means to really reverence God, but which in other traditions came down, unfortunately, as sort of the evil force or the bad force. And this has been a major reason for all of the persecution. There's many, many things to say about Tausi Melek. Those might be things to ask about later on, but I'm going to sort of scoot along. The Yazidi community has a complex structure that designates religious responsibilities, and it also designates who you're allowed to marry. That's quite different than a caste system, although it might look like that from the starting point. It doesn't really doesn't limit your social standing. What it affects is your religious responsibilities more than anything. And one of the things that seems to be the case is that this is a way of limiting and dividing power. So the higher the castes that you would think of as being more powerful have fewer responsibilities. They're not allowed to intermarry with one another, which means that those responsibilities remain in distinct hands. And that seems to be a rather clever way of dividing things up and ensuring, or trying to ensure in any case, that the whole people get served. So that's an element that is probably important to understand, and to understand that it's perhaps different than our first impression. Yazidis are endogamous, which means that they only marry other Yazidis, but they also, even within that, as I noted above, they have further limitations and impose further limitations on themselves as well. which as the community grows smaller is proving quite challenging. However, given the context in Iraq, where religious minorities are allowed to practice their religion, but they're not allowed to convert. And basically anybody who marries anybody outside of the Yazidi community loses the standing as a Yazidi, and with all certainty the children do. So there's a lot of elements that go into that that are not strictly religious. Yazidis share a lot of common rituals and stories with Abrahamic traditions. So there's a lot of things that are quite familiar, but then they have a different twist. So the stories of Adam and Eve, various ones, don't have the same sort of harsh turn with regards to sin. I won't go into that too much, but that's there's different readings of something that seems to have happened in that space. The Noah story is really quite interesting. With there's a black snake goes, and there's a hole in the boat in the ark, and the snake basically gives itself up and saves everybody. And there too, of course, you have animals that have taken on a symbolism of a very different nature in other religions. For Yazidis, they have a positive take, and that becomes important as we look at how Yazidis relate with others around them. They're coming from their own context. We're coming from ours, and recognizing that that can be in some instances so completely different is important as we approach discussions and try to understand each other. One other element is that although there's a lot of similarities in terms of stories, in terms of there are things that certainly can be compared with Zoroastrianism, one very critical element of Yazidism is that they reject all forms of dualism in the divine sphere. What that means is there is no cosmic fight or cosmic conflict. God and all that is God's, and that includes also the angels, are purely good, and that everything that happens that's negative and that's painful and that is deadly, and they've experienced plenty of that, happens in their understanding on the human plane, and is a responsibility that humans carry. So there's no scapegoat in that respect. And I mean that also literally. We'll get to that as we talk about prayer. We said earlier, Yazidism is largely based on oral traditions and practices. They speak of books that were written, these have been lost. And in a conversation just a couple of days ago, there's a black book that does contain some of their traditions. One of the sort of learned scholars here, or not quite a scholar, but people who is recognized as someone who knows a lot about the religion, basically told me completely different stories. So recognizing that all of that exists within Yazidism, and at the same time, as we'll see, there are really important common threads that keep the population together and give them a sense of identity. And the primary one is prayer, as I would say it. Yazidis, they pray in their prayers for other people before they pray for themselves. So they speak of the 72 nations in at least some of their prayers. You see here a woman who is kissing a holy cloth. What she's just done is untied the knot that somebody else put in there for prayer and then put in her own. And so she will rely on somebody else to untie her knot, which also shows something of the sense of community and of interconnectedness. One thing that Yazidis rarely speak about is the connection between the 72 nations, and how for years and years, they referred to 72 genocides, although nobody really thinks that that's a literal number. Many would say there's way more than that. What exactly constitutes a genocide is a whole other question. But for me, it's an important connection that they've recognized. When they pray for everybody. That's what the 72 nations generally, not only in Yazidism, but other religions, what that sort of symbolizes. But they also maintain that they've been, the victim of a whole lot of violence and conflict. And this has shown itself in the modern day as well. I said that this sort of ended in 2007 because that was the stage of a massive truck bombing where some 800 people lost their lives and 1,500 were injured. That happened in the village that I'm staying in right now, and another village a few kilometers away. And that is what many people say constitutes the 73rd genocide. And then the biggie of the modern era, where ISIS came in 2014, it killed around 5,000, enslaved about another 5,000 to 6,000 women and children, who then went on to be sold into sex slavery for the most part. The young boys were trained for military responsibilities with ISIS, which obviously is a pretty horrible fate for all of those people. And it displaced hundreds of thousands. So again, the exact numbers are hard to come by. We could say probably around 400,000, but that's an estimate. Where do Yazidis live? Now, quite a lot has changed since 2014, but I'm going to stick primarily with the traditional spaces. Most of the Yazidi dignitaries live in Lalish or around Lalish, in places like Sharia and Badra in Kurdistan. This is a picture here of Baba Sheikh, the religious leader, the Mir family, who's sort of the secular leader. They also live in this region, and something about 10% of the rest of the population has lived there on for a longer term basis. And several thousands, probably more than 10,000s, live in the twin villages of Bashik and Bazani. It's notable that these communities are, although geographically relatively near to one another, there's a lot of important distinctions, because those in Bashik and Bazani, they speak Arabic, the others speak Kurdish, and those in Shingal, which we'll be getting to, they also speak Kurdish, but are in a more Iraqi region. It's a disputed territory, which is not clear. It's not clear whether it belongs to Kurdistan or to Iraq, and has been an issue of debate and conflict, really, for the last 20 years because of that. Most Yazidis are from Shingal, the Nineveh province of Iraq, but about half of those now live in Kurdistan as IDPs. Many of those are in camps, and some have found places where they can stay. Some have actual houses, others are in unfinished buildings. So it's a hard life, and it's not home. That's generally what you hear. And about 100,000 have moved to other countries. Actually, that number is higher than that. They've moved to the West or to other countries where they live as refugees and are trying to make a life for themselves. So thousands more live in tents on Mount Shingal. I noted earlier that a few small villages weren't destroyed. I was there a couple of days. This is Malik. Malik and Karsi are two of the places where you see what Yazidism has been and can look like on Mount Shingal. Much of the region, however, is destroyed. This is downtown Shingal City. It's completely empty. Nothing has been done to rebuild it. You go down another kilometer or so, and you have sort of a makeshift city center where you have some towns. You have some shops, but the historic older area is still completely destroyed. Landmines, airstrikes from Turkey. Those are major concerns. This is on the way up to Jidala. Thankfully, there's a group right now. They do know where the landmines are, that there are landmines in a particular area, and they are removing them right now. So that's very good for the region, and other places have already been removed, but that's not the case in all of Shingal. Turkey, unfortunately, does do airstrikes rather often, at least several times a year. They generally have very clear targets, but it is problematic. More than 2,000 Yazidi women and children are still in ISIS captivity, and that's something that really is a stress and a strain and a psychological hardship for all of Yazidis. For them, of course, more than anybody, but it's unknown where they are. It's a painful situation. Mass graves are another problem or another reality more than anything that confronts the Yazidi community. And infrastructure is weak, job opportunities are scarce. It's hard to return to Shingal. This is from the school in Sibishi Khadir, one of the villages that is largely destroyed. I found this crazy that this is how it was a couple of days ago, and I found this in paper that one of the students had written. I'm not sure if he meant to say his school is clean or the school is clean, but in any case, a lot has changed since this child, who's now grown, wrote that. Still, as I said, approximately 100,000 have returned from displacement and are trying to rebuild. And events like today, where thousands have come to, where 1,000 or so come together and rekindle their culture and religion in spaces that have been so important for generations and for centuries, gives hope. So how did I get to know Yazidis? Essentially, it was that we already said, I'm responsible for church asylum. In 2015 and 16, you might remember there was this thing called the Willkommenkultur, the welcome culture in Germany. And we took in whoever whoever needed a space. We asked what was needed. They needed rooms. And it happened that people who came to us were Yazidis for the most part, not all of them, but I got to know them. I got to know about their plight. And a couple of years later, when that welcome culture sort of fizzled out, there was a need from their relatives, from the people I knew well, for church asylum. I again won't go into the details of that, but if they stay in a church for several months, then they're allowed to have their asylum case in Germany, and we feel that that's something that is valuable and something that we can and want to do. So over that course, we've had something like 70 Yazidis live with us in church asylum, and through them, I've learned language. I've learned about their culture. I've learned to some extent how to cook their food, although I'm still very much a novice compared to them. And I've learned about the priorities that they have and the way that they understand their own religion and their own culture. So here, moving on to a picture of some of the people who've lived with us. This is from a few years ago. But it was really through all of them and them saying that what we do is khair. It's sort of a blessing. started taking note of this word, and I noticed how often it would come up in conversations, or every time you greet one another in the morning, again and again. When you eat, it's a way of there's lots of times again and again when it comes up. And as a Benedictine nun myself, where our basis is blessing, it seemed like a link and something I wanted to explore. And so I started trying to do that, and I realized this was way more complex than I had imagined, and that it sheds light on their basic self-identity and their religion, and how we might understand it, as well as how we might be able to help Yazidis in a more authentically Yazidi or Yazidi appropriate way. So we'll get into the question, what is prayer? I've asked this so many times, and some of the best answers that I've gotten as a prayer is the underlying psychology of Yazidis. That seems to underscore the thing that what I've understood. God is prayer, not conflict. This goes right back to the basis of that I spoke of earlier. There is no dualism. So the idea that God is pure prayer, there is not anything in that divine realm that is not prayer. And every time we participate in prayer, what we're doing is we're participating in God's, the way that things were intended to be. And the person who told me this, prayer is service to God, we were speaking in German, and she initially said, oh yeah, prayer, it's like a donation. And then she thought about it a little bit, and by the end of it, she said, no, that's true, it's service to God. But the word in German is the same thing as a worship service, which to me says a whole lot about the depths of what is done in sometimes very simple acts that might seem very, very distinct from prayer or religion. So some forms that prayer takes. Honoring the dead. That I have a picture here of the cemetery in Cocho, which is one of the greatest tragedies of 2014. But it's also something that is mandatory and also certainly desired when your own family members die. For the entire year, you make prayer, a meal at the beginning of each month. When a person dies, you make meals for something like 7 days. Always needs to be an odd number. So honoring the dead is an important way of showing prayer. When they have their important feasts, most of the time they'll go out and visit the graves and sort of pay respect, have meals there. So this is an important element. The graves also are next to the shrines, so it's all very much connected. So giving and receiving alms, this is in Lalish, and give a little bit of money. Fasting and sharing food with others during days of fasting. So there's a time of fasting that every Yazidi participates in the month of December, 3 days, which is really a great celebration. For me, I became aware of just how important that is because of hosting so many Yazidis who are considered to be in a hard position. We get 60, 70, 80 kilos of meat and a whole week's worth of groceries from people in the days and weeks surrounding these fast days. That's a means of providing prayer. The prayers that you say during those times, taking extra fasting days. So all of these are part of this whole context. Lighting cotton wicks at a shrine. I'm using terms that we know in English rather than Gramanji terms, but that's one of the ways. A little bit like lighting a candle, washing your hands and face in the Holy Streets of Lalish. Offering prayer. I said earlier today that for Jemiah, there will be something like 10 sheep that will lose their lives. That's a form of prayer. A few days ago, because we visited Sheikh Mad and Sheikh Adi, Lalish, they slaughtered 3 chickens and had that for a meal. So that's an important way. And as much as anything, it's important that you share it with others as well. So that's one of the elements that keeps the community together. Sharing your harvest with others, especially the poor, sweeping up trash and lalish. Everything that's associated with a bakchik. You see that this piece of cloth there on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, we have everything that's inside of it. So all of these special trinkets, everything that has a holy sort of significance to it. So many other things, playing, kissing, or dancing to the drums and flutes of religious musicians, greeting everyone in the room with a blessing. So as long as you're blessing people, then giving or receiving freshly baked naan. Every time women men, I guess too, bake naan, they'll give 2 naan to somebody else, generally one of their neighbors. But there are so many things like this. I could go on for hours, which I will not do. But it seems, at first it seemed to me that everything constituted prayer. And that's when I started getting, no. There are ways, there are things that aren't. And that is really what helps give the context. So I'll give a few of these examples. So kissing the hand of a sheikh or peer, so the higher religious classes, is not in itself prayer. If it often is done, but it's done as a form of respect. If you greet them with a blessing, then sure, that's a prayer like for everybody else. But their position doesn't make it automatically prayer in a way that with some religions you might think that it might. However, certain figures within the Yazidi community, basically anything associated with them is considered prayer. This is especially true of Baba Chawish, of fakirs with the hierarchy, and with the women and men who serve essentially as Salvat nuns and monks in Lalish. And the distinction there is that prayer is intentional, on both parts. So if you just greet somebody, it's not a blessing just because the other person is of a higher standing. And if that person is of a higher standing, that doesn't make them prayer because they were just born into it. But if you choose that way of life, that's when it becomes prayer. Anything, no matter if you're doing things in organic and you're doing things in a very special way, if what you're doing is for your own benefit, giving money or aid to your family, watering your own plants, all of these things, it's not prayer, unless what you're doing is also for others. So doing all of that and also being the recipient and of any of these things is prayer if you aren't responsible for one another anyway. So it has to be something. So for instance, if I water my own plants, not prayer. But if I see that a tree is in need of water and I give it to it, that is prayer. What does not constitute prayer? So giving or receiving assistance because of some harm done. And this is then, I will kind of leave this at where it is, but this has nothing to do specifically with UNICEF, but for a lot of the international sort of organizations that help, there's the question, of course, of things might possibly have been stopped or could certainly have been stopped, and stepping in at a later stage is after the primary harm is already done, is sometimes hard. It's hard for people to accept that, or it isn't accepted as prayer. It can't be something that's making up for a fault or for something for harm or damage that you've done. So interestingly, weddings, although so in the Catholic tradition, for instance, that's a sacrament, the sacrament of marriage, not so with Yazidis. That's considered to be normal life and something wonderful that most people want to do. And so things like dancing at a wedding is not considered prayer. However, today, sort of, and tomorrow, certainly, because of the instruments that will be used. If you're at Jamaya, if you're at a religious festival and you do the very same dances, then that's considered prayer. Again, it has to do with the context and it has to do with the intention. So a few rules of the economy of prayer. Prayer is often a humanitarian act, but the purpose is to honor God. The second one for me, I think, is perhaps really important for us to get our heads around, especially those people in the West, like myself. Prayer is not a matter of doing it to others as you would have them do to you, sort of the typical golden rule. It's just not about you. It's about God. And it's an exchange, as this third one says, between two. It's not an exchange between two parties, but a means of acting as God's hands and receiving from God's hands. So if I give something to you and it's prayer, I cannot in any way say, oh, I helped you. This was something that I benefit from it because I've given prayer, and you cannot be ashamed because you've received it from God. So these are just a few points. I probably went quickly, and there might be a lot of questions, or perhaps a few in any case, but that's a look into the work I've been doing, some of the thoughts that I've been sort of coming to understand, and I would love to discuss some of these with you further in the next section of the webinar. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so very, very much, Sister Makrina. I learned an awful lot, and I felt like I'd gotten a head start because of all the conversations that we've had. We do have a number of questions for you, and they're around the area of chronology, but also identity. So the chronology question is, sort of which came first, the Abrahamic traditions or Yazidism? Do we have any idea of that timeline?
Yeah, Yazidis would say, and I think with very good reasons, that Yazidism is substantially older. However, you don't start hearing about it. It's not called Yazidism in any written text. This, of course, comes back to the oral tradition, or in any written ways until really the 11th century. Sheikh Adi was the great Yazidi reformer and created the caste systems as they appear today. They take some of their basis on so having sheikhs. That was something that certainly is related to some Muslim traditions. Pir seems to be specifically Yazidi. And it seems that although some substantial changes took place at that time, he was essentially ordering what was already there and what had already been there for a very long time. So again, when you go back 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years, it's very hard to speak about certainties, but there's reasons to think that the basis of Yazidism existed long before the Abrahamic traditions.
Right.
But in the same space.
Yes, and how are these religious groups getting along in this same space? Let's leave ISIS out of the question here, but is there any interreligious effort? Are there conversations?
A major challenge at this stage is that much of the community is not there. So there's a lot of challenges in Kurdistan itself. So with Christians and Yazidis, that's a wonderful relationship, and it has been for a long time. The Hamoshero, who is the sort of great-great-grandfather of some of the people who I know especially well, one of the things that he's the thing he's best known for is taking in 20,000 Christians during the Armenian genocide, so 100 years before their own genocide. And one of the things that really made it so difficult in 2014 was that Yazidis and many of their Muslim neighbors had such strong relationships. They even there's a tradition where one of your children will basically be made a member of the other family, which connects the two of you. And a lot of families had this. And so you had very, very good relationships amongst neighbors, which is what made it so much more difficult that those relationships didn't hold in many, many cases, although they did in some. So it's difficult being in a country that is based on with Sharia law and has Islam as such a dominant religion, because it's there, and the political factions that exist on the higher levels make it hard for everybody. On the ground, you've got a whole lot more possibility of being with one another, of relating to one another, and of friendship. So that's a complicated answer, and also not. I'm trying to be careful with it.
Well, it's interesting that religion has, in the last 50, 100 years, has really served to splinter communities in so many countries in Europe and in the region we call the Middle East and Myanmar, and it's sort of counter to what I think the purpose of religion might be. But as we talk about this identity, we got a question from Ifet from Istanbul, who's curious to know if the Yazidis are Kurdish.
Those who identify as Kurdish and live in Kurdistan, I'm happy to say that they are Kurdish. They share a common language, and a major challenge is that the term Kurd is, for Yazidis, one that essentially, when a lot of Yazidis were when they converted, or in many, many cases were forcibly converted, that's sort of the basis of what we now know as the Kurdish population. You don't have any Christian people living in these regions who call themselves Kurds. So it's a real point of contention, and very especially for Yazidis living in Shingal, because you have the autonomous region of Kurdistan and the Republic of Iraq, both sort of vying for their identity, and they don't want to be considered either of them. They consider themselves to be distinct for the most part, but you're going to have some people in Shingal who treat that differently, and it's quite understandable for those in the Kurdistan region if they see that as a sort of as a cultural distinction or a linguistic distinction, or they'll consider themselves Kurdish. But I think it's important to let the community identify, sort of establish their own identity.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing. I grew up, my father's from Iraq, not from Kurdish Iraq, but Arab Iraq. And what I learned to identify as an Arab is that your mother tongue is Arabic. So although I'm an American Arab, I'm not an Arab because my mother tongue is English. But it's different in a community where the language writ large might be Kurmanji, and it is spoken by people from different religions, Muslim Kurds, Yazidis, so it's identity gets down to such a microscopic level, and we forget the real microcosm, which is we are human. We keep separating that out,
And much of it's political. It's just much of it comes down to the sense of on ground level, you tend not to have the major problems, but the moment that your identity is sort of taken from you, or it's used for political purposes, then you take a different, you have a different relationship to it. So the answer would have been different even from Yazidis in Shingal a few decades ago. Most people, especially from Shingal, would just sort of look at you and wonder why you're asking such a question, because it's not necessarily how they identify. So, but it's important for them and for us to be able to discuss the question and just to do so respectfully.
Returning to the conversation about hair specifically, our viewer Lionel Savage asks, what's the typical response from people who are recipients of hair? In our tradition, we might say thank you, for example. But how does that work?
May God give you khair. May God give you a blessing. So that's your response. And it's also something of an acknowledgement that you've received from God.
Mm-hmm. Aaron Azar asks, it seems that the uniqueness of the cultures and practices of Yazidism would make it particularly difficult to adapt in other cultures, particularly Western cultures. How do the Yazidis in Germany cope?
It's hard. It's very hard. And it's helpful that nearly 25% of the population now lives in Germany, and they tend to live next to one another. So the city of Celle has become something of a Yazidi center. I don't know if the majority population there is Yazidi, but it feels like it in certain quarters. And the same is true parts of Hanover and Oldenburg. So they tend to live next to one another. But then they realize the challenges. Some perhaps the American experiment also can shed some light on it. But Yazidis come together, and you have an existing Turkish Yazidi community in Germany that came generally in the 70s and 80s, but they've adapted and they have different traditions. So it'd be the same as if a Syrian Christian and an American Christian came together. Not quite the same. Obviously regionally they're a lot closer, but almost. And yes, you share a religion, you share a lot of traditions, but there are many things that you realize, oh, we do things distinctly from one another. And that's actually one of the things, and I'll get back to Germany quickly, but one of the things that they've discovered in the IDP camps is that Yazidi tradition in Shingal is different than in Kurdistan. And that shouldn't be surprising, but it's taken the two communities coming together to realize that. So I think the biggest challenge of the diaspora community and of the community in Iraq is that their structures have been destroyed. So family structures, communal structures that used to serve as support, when they're fractured, that makes for serious challenges. If the Yazidis have a sheikh who's responsible for them, for their whole family, and also personally for them when they die, if that person still lives in Iraq and you're in Germany, what are you to do? There's many instances like that that make it really challenging, especially since the community is now divided in 3 regions. So the West or outside of Iraq, and then Kurdistan and Shingal itself.
We have a question from Neil Douglas Klotz, which is getting into some theology here. Can you say anything about Taus Malik in relation to the Sufi view of Iblis, especially that of Al-Hallaj, who saw Iblis as the perfect lover of God?
I don't know that there's a relationship. I wouldn't really see it as one. Taus Malik isn't ever really recognized as a lover. There's nothing in any case that I've ever heard in that respect. More of a knower. Taus Malik knows God and Taus Malik is a bit feisty. When God wants him to create humanity, he said it doesn't want to. But then when God sort of tests with saying, worship, that you should worship humanity, it's he who says, no, you're God, and you can't worship anybody besides you. Is that love? Is that an act of love as a lover? Is that an act of respect? Is that an act of knowing how things are ordered? I would probably say it's the third. And that's the real basis of Yazidism. That's important to, that is critical, that for me is eye-opening, that Yazidism really is about order, about maintaining order, about creating order, maintaining order, and restoring order. And that's also an element of prayer. So there's a lot of crossover with Sufism, but I'm not sure that that particular element would go so far, but maybe it might be something to explore.
What countries are trying to help rebuild the Yazidi communities, even if it is not an act of prayer, even if they were participants in the destruction? Who's involved in that effort?
Germany, France, I mean, a number of countries have been involved in the past. Germany has been largely has had a lot, because they've taken in so 10% of the population in the last 8 years, and also is interested in helping to restore. France has made a lot of welcoming signs. To be unfortunately honest, there's nothing close to enough support. The UN is, I would say, by far the biggest supporter. US aid, the US also offers a fair amount of support, but it's all extremely limited. And there's a number of things that have to take place on political levels, including ensuring that Turkey stops doing airstrikes. I'm simplifying that situation, won't go into it. But those are some of the things that really need to, some leadership needs to be taken on those steps, on those areas that hasn't been taken.
Sister Makrina, let me ask this as a final question, which is, you're not only Catholic, you are a nun. You're part of the Benedictine order. What is it for you? What are you learning? What is motivating your exploration of this other religious tradition? And do you find yourself in conflict at any moments in time between what your belief system is and what you're discovering? So I wanted to dig in a little bit with you on that.
Conflict is probably not the word, but it's really made me rethink a lot of things. Also, one of the things that I sort of put this as one of the rules of prayer, of it's not about you. And there is a fair amount when sin is so central to the Christian religions, the Christian religion and different. There's a real focus on what we've done wrong and how to make it right. Whereas with Yazidism, there tends to be more a focus on God as prayer and of re-entering of entering this order, and it's nuanced, what I'm seeing right there, but yeah, to recognize really the full goodness of God, and to make my prayers less about me and really, am I praying for everybody else before I'm prepared to bring my own intentions? There are so many, more than anything, so many similarities. There's so many things that helps me to understand my faith. Now, theologically, there are differences, of course, and we respect each other with those differences, but it's less of a conflict and more of allowing me also to see myself in a mirror, to see my own faith. One of the things that's been a positive challenge is trying to explain my faith to people who didn't grow up in it, and to express those things together, and to experience Good Friday, for instance, with victims of genocide is a really intense experience. They teach me a whole lot more about the pain of senseless violence, and of not blaming, of not of just, again, just lifting up things, lifting yourself up and lifting things up to God. Those are some of the things that I've learned. And so it's made me think, but not be conflicted.
Well, to be made to think, that's got to fit somewhere in the principles of khair.
Certainly.
And Sister Makrina Finlay of the Dinklaga Abbey in Northern Germany, thank you so much for being with us today and opening our minds and hearts and teaching us something a lot of us don't know much about. Really grateful. I look forward to hearing more.
It's been a pleasure. So thank you very much for the opportunity and for all of you who joined for this past hour or so.
For all of us at the Abraham Path Initiative, thank you for joining us.